Welcome to Nachtmeier Witness. Some nights feel wrong before anything happens. The air feels heavy, the room feels colder, and somewhere in the dark, you get the strange feeling that you are being watched. Tonight, you will hear stories from people who became witnesses to things they never expected to see. Some saw someone standing in the shadows. Some heard voices with no one nearby. Others found themselves in places that did not feel real at all. Before we begin, leave a comment and tell me where you are listening from tonight. And if you enjoy true scary stories with a slow, dark atmosphere, subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. Get comfortable. The night has already begun. I was around 4 years old when this happened, so some parts of the memory are not perfectly clear. I was very young, and it has been about 10 years since that evening. Still, there are certain sounds, feelings, and moments that I remember clearly. The part that stays with me most is not only what happened, but what could have happened if my mother had arrived home a little later. It was around 5 in the afternoon. I remember the time because my mother usually finished work around then, and we were expecting her to come home soon. My father was asleep because he worked night shifts. He needed to rest during the day so he could stay awake through the night. My older sister and I were upstairs together. She was only a few years older than me, but at that age, those few years made her seem much more grown up. When our parents were busy or sleeping, I usually followed her around because I trusted her and felt safer near her. Our house was old. It made noises all the time, especially when the weather changed or someone walked across certain parts of the floor. The foundation was not as strong as it had once been, and the wood inside the house creaked and shifted. Pipes knocked in the walls, floorboards groaned, and doors sometimes moved slightly even when nobody touched them. Because of that, we were used to hearing strange sounds. Most of the noises did not frighten us. Our parents had explained that old houses moved and settled. If we heard something at night, we usually blamed the wood, the pipes, or the wind. That afternoon, my sister and I heard a light knocking sound. At first, it did not seem important. It was not a clear knock on the front door. It sounded quieter and farther away, almost like something tapping against part of the house. It may have been coming from downstairs, one of the walls, or somewhere outside. I was too young to identify the exact direction. My sister heard it too. We stopped talking for a moment and listened. There were a few more soft taps. We looked at each other, but neither of us seemed seriously worried. Since our house made so many strange noises, we assumed this was another one. We even laughed about it. In the dramatic voices children use when pretending to be frightened, we said something like, "Ooh, so scary. Who's at the door?" We were joking. To us, it was like something from a cartoon or a ghost story. We imagined a silly monster standing outside and knocking. We did not believe there was actually anyone there. The tapping continued. At first, it remained light. Tap, tap. Then there would be silence for a short time. After a few seconds, it would begin again. My sister and I kept trying to ignore it. We continued playing or talking, but every time the noise returned, we stopped and listened. It slowly began to sound more deliberate. The gaps between the knocks became shorter. The taps were no longer random enough to sound like pipes or wood moving. They came in small groups, as though someone was using their fingers or a small object to knock against something. My sister was the first one to stop laughing. I could see that she was trying to understand where the sound was coming from. Since she was older, she probably realized before I did that it did not sound like the normal noises our house made. We listened closely. The knocking became louder. It did not suddenly turn into banging. It increased slowly, almost as if whoever or whatever was making the sound was becoming impatient. At first, There had been quiet taps. Now there were firmer knocks. The sound seemed to move through the house. Sometimes I thought it was near a window. Other times it seemed to come from below us. Because I was only 4, I did not have the words to explain why it felt wrong. I only knew I no longer wanted to joke about it. My sister tried to stay calm for my sake. She told me it was probably still the house. I wanted to believe her. Our father was asleep nearby, and knowing he was home made us feel safer. If anything was truly wrong, we thought he would wake up and handle it. The problem was that we did not want to wake him ourselves. My father slept lightly, even though he worked night shifts and needed rest. The smallest creak from a floorboard could disturb him. If we made too much noise while he was sleeping, he would sometimes call out, "Shh, shh," from his room. My sister and I knew we were supposed to be quiet. We worried that if we woke him, he would think we had been running around or hitting something. We did not want him to become angry and blame us for the noise. So we stayed upstairs and waited. The knocking continued for what felt like a very long time. Looking back, I think it lasted around half an hour. When you are 4 years old and frightened, 30 minutes feels much longer. Every minute seemed to stretch. The sound would stop just long enough for us to relax slightly. Then it would start again. Knock, knock, knock. Each time, it seemed louder. At some point, the knocks became heavy bangs. The sound no longer seemed like part of an old house. Something was hitting the building. My sister and I moved closer together. We did not go downstairs to investigate. We did not look outside. We stayed upstairs because we were too frightened and too young to know what to do. I remember wondering whether someone was at the front door. Maybe they needed help. Maybe they were looking for our parents. But if someone wanted to speak to us, why did they not ring the bell or call out? Why were they knocking in a way that seemed to come from somewhere else? The banging continued. Then, suddenly, everything stopped. The house became completely quiet. There were no light taps. There were no heavy knocks. There was only silence. That silence frightened me more than the noise had. When the banging was happening, at least we knew where the danger might be. Once it stopped, we had no idea what was happening. Had the person left? Had they entered the house? Were they standing somewhere downstairs, listening to us? My sister and I barely moved. The normal sounds of the house seemed louder now. The soft movement of the walls, the distant sound of traffic, and even our breathing caught my attention. We waited for the knocking to return. It did not. Then my father woke up. He had heard enough of the noise to disturb his sleep. He came out of his room looking tired and confused. My sister and I immediately became nervous for a different reason. We thought he was going to blame us. We imagined him asking why we had been banging on the walls while he was trying to sleep. We had not made the sound, but we were afraid he would not believe us. He looked at us and asked, "Was that you?" My sister answered first. No. She told him we had also heard the knocking and thought it was the house. My father studied us for a moment. I think he could tell from our faces that we were frightened and telling the truth. He did not yell. Instead, he became serious. If the sound had been loud enough to wake him, and neither of us had caused it, then he needed to find out where it came from. He began checking the house. My sister and I stayed close while he went from room to room. He looked downstairs, checked the doors, and searched places where someone might be hiding. I do not remember every part of his search, but I remember the fear of waiting for him to find something. Every time he opened a door, I expected a stranger to be standing behind it. Every time he looked around a corner, I imagined someone jumping toward him. He checked the windows. He checked the entrance. He looked through the rooms. There was nobody inside. Nothing seemed damaged. The doors were still closed, and there was no clear sign that anyone had entered. After checking everything, my father began to relax. He told us it must have been the house. That explanation made sense because of the old foundation and all the noises we normally heard. Maybe part of the wood had been shifting. Maybe something outside had been hitting the wall. He had barely finished saying it when the tapping started again. It began very lightly. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was so soft at first that we all froze and listened. My father heard it too. This time, there was no doubt that my sister and I had not imagined anything. The tapping grew stronger. The same pattern began again, only now my father was awake to hear it. The light ticks became knocks. The knocks became loud bangs. Something was hitting the house with more and more force. My father started looking around again, trying to follow the sound. I do not know whether he could tell where it was coming from. Inside an old house, sound can move through walls and floors, making it difficult to locate. The banging seemed close, but we could not see anyone. My sister and I were terrified. We no longer worried about being blamed. Our father now knew the sound was real. He told us to stay inside and stay away from the windows. I do not remember whether he called anyone at that point. Everything became confusing because I was so young. I only remember the banging, my sister beside me, and my father trying to understand what was happening. Then I heard a car pull into the driveway. It was my mother coming home from work. Normally, hearing her car would have made me excited. That day, I immediately felt relieved because another adult was home. But almost as soon as she arrived, I heard her shout outside. "Who are you?" The fear in her voice changed everything. She was not speaking to my father. She was not greeting a neighbor. There was someone outside our house. My father moved quickly when he heard her. My sister and I stayed inside, but I wanted to know what was happening. I was too frightened to go near the door, yet I also did not want my mother to be outside alone with a stranger. There were voices, but I could not understand everything being said. Then, a few minutes later, I heard police sirens. They became louder as the vehicles approached our street. Red and blue lights flashed outside the house. The sirens stopped nearby, and officers began speaking with my parents. My sister and I remained close together. At 4 years old, I did not fully understand what the police were doing or why the man had been near our home. I only knew that the banging had been caused by someone real. It had not been the foundation. It had not been pipes. It had not been an old wall settling. There had been a man outside. My mother had noticed him in our garden when she arrived. He had apparently been hiding there or standing in a place where he could reach part of the house without being easily seen from inside. The police later learned that he lived only 4 or 5 doors down from us. That made the situation even more disturbing. He was not a stranger who had accidentally stopped at the wrong house. He lived nearby. He knew the area. He may have known our family's routine. He may have known that my father slept during the afternoon because of his night job. He may have known that my mother was still at work. Most frightening of all, he may have known that my sister and I were inside. The police said he had been trying to lure us. I did not understand exactly what that meant when I was 4. As I got older, I understood more. The man had been making noises outside the house because he wanted my sister and me to come and investigate. He may have hoped we would open a door. He may have wanted us to look out a window. He may have expected 2 curious children to follow the knocking until we found him. At first, he used quiet taps. When we did not respond, he became more aggressive. The taps turned into knocking. The knocking turned into banging. It continued for about half an hour because he was waiting for one of us to come outside. Thinking about that now makes me feel sick. When my sister and I joked, "Who's at the door?" there really was someone outside. We thought it was funny because we believed we were safe. We thought our old house was making another strange sound. The entire time, a man may have been listening and waiting for us. I often wonder what he would have said if we had gone downstairs. Maybe he would have pretended to need help. Maybe he would have said he had lost something in the garden. Maybe he would have told us our mother had sent him. Children are taught not to speak to strangers, but he was not completely unknown. He lived only a few houses away. We may have seen him before without knowing his name. That might have made him seem less dangerous. The police did not explain every detail to us because we were children. My parents protected us from much of what happened afterward. I do not know exactly what the man planned. I do not know whether he intended to take both of us or only one of us. I do not know how long he had been watching our home. I only know what my family later told me. He had been trying to lure my sister and me outside. My mother arriving when she did may have stopped something terrible. She noticed him in the garden and immediately challenged him. If she had been distracted, she might have walked inside without seeing him. If she had come home 10 minutes later, the banging might have continued. If my father had stayed asleep, my sister and I might eventually have become curious enough to investigate. That is the possibility that still frightens me. My sister was older and probably knew better than to open the door for a stranger, but we were children. We did not understand how dangerous the situation was. The knocking had already continued for a long time. Maybe we would have eventually looked through a window. Maybe we would have gone downstairs to prove there was nothing there. Maybe the man would have changed his plan and entered through an unlocked part of the house. There are too many possibilities. For a long time after that evening, knocking sounds made me nervous. Even normal visitors at the door could make my body tense. If someone knocked unexpectedly, I wanted an adult to answer. The sounds our old house made also stopped feeling harmless. Before the incident, creaks and taps were just part of living there. Afterward, every sound made me wonder whether someone was outside again. My parents became more careful. They checked the doors and windows more often. They warned us never to investigate strange noises by ourselves. If someone called us from outside, we were not supposed to respond unless we could clearly see and recognize them. I think the experience affected my sister too, though we do not always talk about it. She was old enough to understand more of what was happening at the time. She was also the one who had answered our father when he asked if we were making the noise. She must have felt responsible for keeping me safe while he was asleep. Neither of us did anything wrong. We stayed upstairs. We did not open the door. We did not go into the garden. But knowing that someone was trying to draw us outside changed the memory forever. It has now been around 10 years since it happened. I am much older, and I understand the danger in a way I could not when I was 4. As a child, I mostly remembered the fear of the banging and the police sirens. Now I think about the planning behind it. The man chose a time when my mother was still at work. He came close to our home. He hid in or near the garden. He made quiet sounds first, probably hoping curiosity would bring us toward him. When we did not respond, he knocked harder. He stayed there for around half an hour. That does not feel like random behavior. He had a purpose. Sometimes I wonder whether he could see us through one of the windows. Maybe he knew we were upstairs. Maybe he heard us joking about the sound. The idea that he could have listened to 2 children laughing while he waited outside is one of the most disturbing parts. We believed the strange noises were part of the house. He may have known exactly what we believed. He used that confusion to remain hidden. I am grateful my father was home, even though he was asleep. The noise eventually woke him, and he checked the house. His presence may have stopped us from doing something dangerous. I am also grateful my mother noticed the man as soon as she arrived. She did not ignore him or assume he belonged there. She challenged him and called attention to his presence. The police arrived before he could disappear without being questioned. My parents protected us, even though none of us understood what was happening at first. The event taught me that danger does not always arrive with a broken door or a loud threat. Sometimes it begins with a small tapping sound. Sometimes it waits outside and hopes curiosity will do the rest. For years I wondered whether the man would have hurt us. I wanted to believe he might only have been trying to scare us, but adults do not hide in gardens and spend half an hour trying to make children come outside for an innocent reason. There was no harmless explanation. Whatever he wanted, it was dangerous enough that the police became involved. The memory returns whenever I hear repeated knocking that I cannot explain. I remember sitting upstairs with my sister. I remember laughing and pretending there was a ghost at the door. I remember the sound becoming harder and angrier. I remember the sudden silence. I remember my father asking if we had caused it. I remember him checking the house and finding nobody. Then I remember the exact moment he said it must have been the old house. The light tapping started again, as if the person outside had heard him. That detail still gives me chills. It felt almost like the man was answering. He had not left during the quiet period. He had only stopped and waited. When he believed we had relaxed, he began again. The taps became loud bangs until my mother pulled into the driveway. Then she saw him in the garden and shouted, "Who are you?" A few minutes later, police sirens filled the street. I was too young to understand how close we may have come to something terrible. Now I understand. My sister and I were alone upstairs, my father was asleep, and someone outside was trying to make us leave the safety of the house. The only thing that stopped him may have been timing. My father woke up. My mother came home. She looked in the right direction. That is why the memory still scares me after all these years. I do not only remember what happened, I think about what almost happened. I wonder what would have happened if my mother had not noticed him in the garden. I wonder what would have happened if she had been late. Most of all, I wonder what the man planned to do if my sister or I had answered his knocking. This happened when I was in my mid-20s and had just moved into a house by myself. At the time, I was excited about finally having a place that was completely mine. I had lived with other people before, so the thought of having my own space felt freeing. I could arrange everything the way I wanted, come home whenever I wanted, and enjoy the quiet without worrying about roommates. The house was in what everyone considered a very safe neighborhood. It was the kind of area where people walked their dogs in the evening, children played outside, and neighbors waved to one another from their driveways. The streets were usually quiet at night, and I had never heard of anything serious happening nearby. Even so, I took security seriously. Living alone made me more aware of every door and window. I put alarms on the windows so I would know if anyone tried to open one. At night, I placed a burglar bar underneath the front door handle. Once it was in place, the door could not easily be pushed open from the outside, even if someone managed to unlock it. I checked the locks every night before going to bed. Sometimes I checked them twice. I knew the neighborhood was safe, but I also knew that safe did not mean nothing bad could ever happen. I wanted to be careful, without allowing myself to become frightened of living alone. For the first few months, everything was mostly normal. The house was old, so it made a lot of sounds. The floors creaked even when no one was walking across them. The pipes knocked inside the walls. The heating system sometimes made a deep sound before switching on, and the wood seemed to shift as the temperature changed. At first, every unfamiliar noise made me stop and listen. I would be sitting in the living room when I heard a creak from another part of the house. Sometimes it sounded like someone had placed a foot on the stairs. Other times, I heard a soft thump beneath the floor, almost like an object had been moved in the basement. I would turn down the television and wait. Most of the time, the sound did not happen again. I kept telling myself it was just an old house. Old houses made strange noises. That was normal. Wood expanded and became smaller. Pipes moved. Animals could get underneath the porch or inside the walls. I understood all of that. Still, some of the noises sounded uncomfortably human. There were nights when I could have sworn I heard someone moving around below me. It was never loud enough to clearly identify. I did not hear full footsteps walking from one side of the basement to the other. It was more like a scrape than a pause, followed by another soft sound. Whenever that happened, I tried not to imagine a person standing beneath the floor. I did not spend much time in the basement. From the first day I saw it, something about that space bothered me. I could not point to one specific reason. It was not that I believed the basement was haunted or that I had seen anything frightening down there. It simply made me uncomfortable. The stairs were narrow and led into a darker part of the house. The walls were unfinished in places, and the air smelled like dust, cold concrete, and old wood. The lighting was poor, and some areas remained shadowy even when the bulbs were on. The basement was also larger than I needed. My washer and dryer were down there, so I had to use it for laundry. I would carry my basket downstairs, put the clothes into the machine, and then return upstairs as soon as possible. I never stayed down there longer than necessary. Sometimes I would leave the basement light on while the clothes were washing, because I did not like the thought of returning to complete darkness. When I went back down, I usually made enough noise to comfort myself. I would clear my throat, move the laundry basket loudly, or speak to myself. It sounds silly now, but the noise made me feel less alone. My landlord had left some things stored in the basement. There were old shelves, boxes, pieces of furniture, and objects that did not belong to me. I was told I could move some of it if I needed more space, but I mostly left everything as I found it. I did not care enough to explore. As long as I could reach the washer and dryer, I was satisfied. After living there for a few months, I began to feel embarrassed by how much the basement bothered me. Nothing had ever happened. No one had tried to break into the house. The window alarms had never gone off. The burglar bar stayed firmly beneath the door every night. I had never found anything missing or moved upstairs. I decided that I needed to stop acting frightened of part of my own home. One day, while there was plenty of sunlight outside, I told myself I was finally going to look around the entire basement. I thought daytime would make it easier. The house felt normal during the day. Cars passed outside, neighbors worked in their yards, and sunlight came through the upstairs windows. There was no reason to be afraid. I went downstairs and switched on every light I could find. The basement still felt unpleasant, but it was not as dark as it usually was. I stood at the bottom of the stairs for a moment and looked around. There was more clutter than I had realized. Some of the landlord's belongings were pushed against the walls. A bookshelf stood in one area, though there were no books on it. Boxes were stacked nearby. There were old boards, cleaning supplies, and random objects that looked as though no one had touched them in years. I decided to do a little rearranging. I was not planning a major cleaning project. I only wanted to make the basement feel less crowded and easier to understand. I thought that if I knew what was in every corner, the room might stop frightening me. I started moving small things first. I shifted some boxes and looked behind them. Most contained ordinary household items. There were old tools, pieces of hardware, and things that had probably been left by earlier tenants or workers. Nothing seemed unusual. As I continued, I noticed a window. It was not one of the small basement windows located high on a wall. This one was lower and larger than I expected. It led directly out toward my back patio. What frightened me was that it was open. I stood there, staring at it. I had lived in the house for months, and I had never noticed this window before. It was partly hidden by the way things had been arranged in the basement, which explained why I had missed it. But I could not understand why it was open. I had checked the windows upstairs when I moved in. I had placed alarms on the ones I used and made sure everything was locked. I had not checked this one because I had not known it existed. The thought made me feel exposed. Anyone standing on the back patio might have been able to open it and enter the basement. Depending on its size, a person could possibly climb through without much trouble. I moved closer and examined it. I tried to remember whether the landlord had mentioned it. I could not recall anything. Maybe a contractor had left it open while working on the property. Maybe it had been opened before I moved in. Maybe it did not close properly. I told myself that those were reasonable explanations. Still, I kept thinking about the noises I had heard below the floor. I imagined someone quietly opening that window at night, climbing into the basement and staying beneath me while I slept upstairs. The idea was terrifying, but I tried not to panic. There was no sign that anyone had recently used the window. I did not see fresh mud, damaged wood, or anything else that clearly showed someone had entered. I closed it and checked the lock. Then I continued looking around, though I was much less relaxed than I had been before. Every object now seemed suspicious. I looked behind boxes more carefully. I checked dark corners before stepping close to them. I listened for movement even though I knew I was alone. My plan had been to make myself feel safer by understanding the basement. Instead, finding the open window had made everything worse. Then I reached the bookshelf. It stood flat against one of the walls and looked old enough to have been there for a long time. It was empty, and I decided to move it so I could clean behind it and possibly place it somewhere more useful. The bookshelf was heavier than it looked. I pulled one side away from the wall and then shifted the other. It scraped across the floor with a deep, unpleasant sound that echoed through the basement. As I moved it farther, I noticed something behind it. At first, I saw only a vertical line in the wall. Then, the full shape became clear. It was a door. I stopped moving. For a few seconds, I simply stared at it. The bookshelf had been positioned directly in front of the door, completely hiding it. If I had not decided to rearrange the basement, I might never have known it was there. The door did not look decorative. It was not a small cabinet or access panel. It was large enough for a person to walk through. My first thought was that someone might be inside. I had heard stories about people secretly living in unused parts of houses. They would enter through a window or hidden door and stay inside without the homeowner knowing. They might come out when the person left for work or after they went to sleep. The open basement window returned to my mind immediately. There was a hidden door behind a bookshelf. There was a window leading to the back patio that I had never checked. There were noises that sometimes sounded like movement beneath the house. My mind connected all of those details at once. I backed away from the door. Every part of me wanted to run upstairs and leave the house. Instead, I stood there, trying to decide what to do. I considered calling the police, but I had no proof that anyone was inside. I could imagine the conversation. I had found a door in my own basement and was afraid to open it. They might have come to check, but I also worried that I was overreacting. The door could lead to a storage cupboard, a utility space, or another harmless part of the basement. I told myself that hiding it behind a bookshelf did not necessarily mean anything. Maybe the landlord had placed the shelf there because the room was no longer used. That explanation made sense. But then I wondered why the landlord had never mentioned the door. I went upstairs. I moved quickly and kept looking behind me as I climbed the stairs. Once I reached the main floor, I locked the basement door, though I knew a normal interior lock would not stop someone determined to come through. I grabbed a flashlight. Then I went to the kitchen and picked up a knife. I knew carrying a knife into an unknown room was not necessarily a good plan. If someone was truly hiding there, I had no idea how they would react. They might be stronger than me, or they might have a weapon of their own. But I could not make myself go back empty-handed. I held the flashlight in one hand and the knife in the other. Then I unlocked the basement door and went downstairs again. The walk down felt completely different this time. Before, I had been trying to prove there was nothing to fear. Now I was expecting to find a stranger. The lights were still on, but the basement seemed darker. The bookshelf remained pulled away from the wall. The hidden door was exactly where I had left it. I stopped several feet away and listened. Nothing. I did not hear breathing, movement, or a voice. I moved closer. The flashlight was unnecessary because the lights were on, but I kept it ready. I pointed it toward the edges of the door and looked at the floor. There were no clear footprints. The handle looked old. I could not tell whether anyone had used it recently. My heart was beating so hard that I could hear it. I imagined opening the door and seeing a person sitting in the darkness. I imagined someone rushing toward me. I imagined finding a mattress, food, and proof that a stranger had been living beneath my house. I reached for the handle. For a moment, I could not make myself turn it. Then I took a breath and opened the door. I raised the knife and pointed the flashlight inside. No one moved. There was no person standing there. I did not hear anyone running away. Instead, I found a room filled with things. There were shoes. There were bags. There were piles of clothes. Food wrappers were scattered around the floor and pushed into corners. Empty water bottles sat among the other objects. There was so much stuff that I could not understand what I was looking at first. It looked like the belongings of several people had been thrown into the room without any care. Some of the clothes were folded, but most were not. Shoes were separated from their pairs. Bags were stacked on top of one another or left open. There were ordinary items mixed with rubbish. The room did not look like a normal storage space. It looked as though people had lived there, or at least spent time there. I remained in the doorway. I did not want to step inside. The smell was stale and dusty. The air seemed heavier than in the rest of the basement. I shined the flashlight across the room, checking every corner. I was still expecting someone to move. There was enough clutter that a person could possibly have been hiding behind something. I moved the beam slowly over the walls, floor, and piles of belongings. Nothing moved. After a while, I noticed that everything was covered in dust. The dust was thick enough to show that the room had not been disturbed recently. The water bottles were dusty. The clothing was dusty. Even the food wrappers looked old. That made me feel slightly better. Whatever had happened in that room, it did not appear that anyone had been using it during the months I had lived in the house. There were no fresh blankets, open food containers, or recently worn clothes. I also did not see a clear sleeping area. There was no clean mattress or organized place where someone had been lying down. Still, the amount of personal belongings was disturbing. Why were there so many shoes? Why were clothes and bags hidden behind a bookshelf? Why were food wrappers and water bottles mixed in with everything else? I thought about the possibility that contractors had used the room as a dumping space. The property had been worked on before I moved in. It was possible that workers had found unwanted belongings left by previous tenants and thrown them into the hidden room instead of properly removing them. That explanation was the easiest one to accept. Old clothes, bags, and shoes could have belonged to anyone who had once lived there. The food wrappers and bottles might have been left by workers taking breaks in the basement. The bookshelf may have been placed in front of the door simply because no one needed access to that room. All of that was possible, but the open window continued to bother me. If people had once used the room for something more than storage, the window could have provided access. Maybe someone had lived there before I moved in. Maybe a former tenant had allowed another person to stay hidden in the basement. Maybe the room had been used by workers who did not want the landlord to know they were sleeping on the property. I did not know. I wanted to search through the belongings and find an explanation, but I could not make myself touch anything. What if there were names inside the bags? What if I found identification, photographs, or something that showed the objects belonged to missing people? That thought may have been unreasonable, but once it entered my mind, I could not ignore it. I closed the door. Then I moved the bookshelf back in front of it. Looking back, I am not sure why I covered it again. Maybe I did not want to see the door every time I came downstairs. Maybe putting the bookshelf back made the basement look the way it had before, which allowed me to pretend nothing had changed. But I knew it was there now. I knew what was behind it. The basement never felt the same after that. I checked the open window repeatedly. I made sure it stayed closed and considered putting an alarm on it. Every sound from below became more frightening. Before, I could tell myself the noises were only the house settling. After finding the hidden room, I imagined objects shifting inside it. I pictured one of the bags falling, or a bottle rolling across the floor. I wondered whether the dust was as old as it looked. What if someone had been careful not to disturb it? What if the room had another entrance I did not know about? The house was old. There could have been crawl spaces, narrow passages, or other doors hidden behind walls and furniture. I tried not to think about that possibility. I eventually told the landlord about the window and the room. I do not remember receiving an answer that completely satisfied me. The most likely explanation remained that old belongings had been thrown there during earlier repairs or cleanouts. That was probably the truth. Contractors often leave behind rubbish, and landlords sometimes ignore parts of properties that tenants do not regularly use. An unused basement room could easily become a place where unwanted things were stored and forgotten. Still, I could never fully accept that explanation. The objects did not feel like normal construction rubbish. Shoes, clothes, bags, food wrappers, and water bottles felt personal. They suggested people. They suggested someone spending enough time in the basement to eat and drink there. Maybe it happened years before I moved in. Maybe there was no danger at all. The thick dust supported that idea, but I often wondered what the room looked like before the dust settled. I wondered who had used those shoes. I wondered what had once been carried in the bags. I wondered whether someone had sat among those objects in the darkness while the rest of the house was occupied above them. The worst part was thinking about the first few months I lived there. I had felt safe because I had alarms on the windows I knew about and a burglar bar beneath the front door. I believed I had secured every entrance. But I had not even known about the basement window. I did not know about the hidden door. There were entire parts of my own home that I had never seen. That changed the way I thought about security. A person can lock every visible door and still miss something. A house can look empty and still hold evidence of people who were there before. I continued using the basement for laundry, but I never became comfortable there. I moved quickly. I kept the lights on. I avoided looking directly at the bookshelf. Sometimes, while waiting for the washing machine, I would hear a soft noise from that side of the basement. I knew it was probably nothing. The pipes ran nearby. The house shifted. Small objects could move as the floor vibrated, but I always imagined the hidden door slowly opening behind the shelf. I never actually saw it move. No person ever appeared. Nothing was ever stolen from my home. There is no proof that anyone entered the basement while I lived there. The logical explanation is simple. The room was an old storage area, and the open window had probably been forgotten by the landlord or a contractor. That is what I try to believe. I do not like thinking about other possibilities. I do not like imagining that someone once lived behind that door. I do not like wondering whether the sounds I heard during my first few months came from the house or from something moving below me. The dust told me no one had been there for a long time. At least, that was what I hoped it meant. Even now, the memory of moving that bookshelf stays with me. I remember the scrape of wood across the floor. I remember seeing the outline of the hidden door. I remember running upstairs for a flashlight and a knife, fully expecting to find a stranger camping inside my basement. I did not find a person. I found everything that suggested a person had once been there. In some ways, that was worse. A stranger could have answered questions. The room could not. It only held old shoes, abandoned bags, dusty clothing, empty bottles, food wrappers, and a history that no one had ever explained to me. I never learned exactly who left those things there. I never learned why the room had been hidden, and I still cannot think about it for too long without wondering whether the safest explanation was really the correct one. This happened about 6 years ago, and even now, I still think about how easily I let the situation begin. At the time, I was working a lot and spending most of my days either at work or traveling back and forth. I did not have much of a social life, and I often felt like I was missing out on normal things people my age were doing. I wanted more company, more nights out, and more reasons not to spend every evening alone in my apartment. One afternoon, I was riding the tram home from work when my phone rang. The call was from a woman named Lucy. That was her real name. Lucy was not exactly a close friend. She was more of an acquaintance, someone I had known in the past, but had not spoken to for years. Seeing her name on my phone surprised me. I could not think of any reason she would suddenly call me after such a long time. When I answered, she sounded distressed. She told me she had been fighting with her boyfriend and needed somewhere to stay. From the way she spoke, it sounded urgent. She gave me the impression that she had nowhere else to go. I have always had a big heart, sometimes bigger than my common sense. I immediately felt sorry for her. Without thinking about it for very long, I told her she could stay with me. "My couch is comfortable," I said. "You can use it for as long as you need." In my mind, as long as you need meant a few days or maybe a few weeks. I assumed she would either repair things with her boyfriend or find another place to live. I did not imagine she would treat my apartment like a permanent home. At first, I was actually excited about the idea. I had been working so much that I had barely seen anyone socially. Having someone stay with me felt like an extended sleepover. I imagined us talking at night, going out for drinks, watching films, and enjoying each other's company. My apartment was small, but I thought we could manage for a short time. I had a spare key hidden in the garage, so I explained where she could find it. I told her to let herself in and make herself comfortable. I would be home in about an hour. During the rest of the tram ride, I was already thinking about what we could do that evening. I wondered whether I should pick up food or wine on the way home. When I finally reached my apartment and opened the door, I realized I had misunderstood the situation. Lucy was sitting on my couch, staring at her phone. Around her were tall clothing racks packed with clothes. There must have been a dozen pairs of shoes spread across the floor. Handbags were stacked and hanging everywhere. There were boxes, personal items, and enough luggage to make it look as though she had been planning the move for weeks. She had not brought a small overnight bag. She had moved almost everything she owned into my living room. My apartment was already small, and now the main room looked more like a crowded second-hand clothing shop. I stood near the entrance, not knowing what to say. "Hey," I said awkwardly. Lucy did not respond at first. She continued looking at her phone as though she had not heard me enter. After a few seconds, she looked up. "Hi," she said. Then she looked back at the screen. It was a strange beginning. but I told myself she had been through a difficult day. Maybe she was upset about the argument with her boyfriend. Maybe she was embarrassed about needing help. I decided not to judge her too quickly. We eventually started talking, and I told her about a trip I was planning. I had been saving money and preparing to travel around Europe for 6 months. I was leaving in less than 2 months, and I was so excited about it that I told almost everyone I spoke to. I mentioned it to Lucy without thinking it would affect her. She smiled and replied, "Great, I'll have this place to myself for 6 months." I remember staring at her, unsure whether she was joking. She did not laugh. That was the first moment I realized she may not have seen my offer as temporary. I had thought I was helping someone through a short crisis. Lucy seemed to believe she had found a new home. I should have corrected her immediately. I should have explained that she could only stay for a limited time, and that she would need to leave before my trip. Instead, I avoided the uncomfortable conversation. I told myself there was still plenty of time. Maybe she would be gone long before I left. During the first few days, things were not terrible. We talked, went into town for drinks, and spent time together. It was nice to have someone around after being alone so often. Lucy could be funny and entertaining, and some of our nights out were genuinely enjoyable. That made it harder to face the things that worried me. Not long after moving in, Lucy told me she was extremely religious. I was not a religious person, but I did not have a problem with her beliefs. People are allowed to believe whatever they want. Then she explained that she sometimes spoke in tongues. I was not completely sure what she meant until she started doing it. At random moments, she would begin speaking in sounds and words that did not belong to any language I recognized. Her voice changed, and she spoke quickly, sometimes with her eyes closed. The first time it happened, I did not know how to respond. She behaved as though it was completely normal. Over the next few weeks, it happened several more times. Sometimes she would suddenly begin doing it in the living room. Other times, I heard her speaking in tongues when she thought she was alone. It was strange, but I tried to respect her beliefs. Her sleeping habits were also disturbing. Lucy sometimes slept with her eyes open. The first time I saw her lying on the couch with her eyes partly open, I thought she was awake and staring at me. I spoke to her, but she did not answer. Then I realized she was asleep. She also screamed during the night. I would wake up to a loud cry from the living room and rush out, thinking something terrible had happened. Lucy would either still be asleep or would wake up confused. At first, I found some of it almost funny in a bizarre way. Living with her was never boring, but by the 3rd week, I was already thinking about asking her to leave. The problem was that I still enjoyed having company. Our weekend nights out were fun. We drank, talked, and laughed. For a few hours, she seemed like an ordinary friend. Then we would return home, and she would begin speaking in tongues or screaming in her sleep. I kept changing my mind. One day, I decided she needed to go. The next day, we had fun together, and I felt guilty for thinking it. By the 5th week, Lucy introduced me online to a friend of hers named Shane. That was not his real name, but I will call him Shane. She connected us through Facebook Messenger. I added him, and we began chatting. Shane seemed normal, friendly, and easy to talk to. We sometimes messaged for hours at night. That continued every few evenings, although it never became romantic or serious. During one of our conversations, he explained how he knew Lucy. She had dated his brother. That immediately gave us something to talk about. I carefully joked that Lucy could be a little unusual. Shane agreed that she was a little nuts. At the time, we both treated it lightly. I thought he meant she was dramatic, emotional, or difficult in relationships. I did not understand how much he knew. Over the next week, Lucy's behavior became more intense. Her religious speeches became longer. The speaking in tongues happened more often. She talked about spiritual forces and things she believed were happening around her. She also started showing a more controlling side. She knew when I finished work, and if I was not home at the expected time, she called me. "Where are you?" she would ask. "You finished work at 5. You're late." The first time, I thought she was worried about me. Then it kept happening. She spoke like a partner demanding an explanation, not a guest staying in someone else's home. I began feeling as if I had to report my movements to her. Sometimes I stayed away from the apartment longer because I did not want to go home and deal with her questions. But being late only made her call more. She also began taking my laundry money. I kept coins for the washing machines, and they would disappear. Lucy denied taking them or acted like it was no big deal. She contributed very little and behaved as if my belongings were hers. She spent almost every waking moment taking selfies. She photographed herself from different angles, changed clothes repeatedly, and posted picture after picture on Facebook. Most conversations eventually became about her appearance. She spoke constantly about how pretty she was, who was attracted to her, and how much attention she received. If I tried to talk about work or something happening in my life, she found a way to bring the subject back to herself. My apartment no longer felt like my home. Her clothing racks filled the living room. Her shoes covered the floor. Her bags were everywhere. Her voice, her photographs, her religious speeches, and her questions followed me from the moment I entered the door. My cat also became terrified of her. At first, I did not understand why. My cat had always been cautious around new people, but this was different. Whenever Lucy entered the room, the cat would hide or move away quickly. She avoided the couch when Lucy was there and sometimes refused to enter the living room at all. I thought Lucy's loud voice or strange movements were frightening her. I did not realize there was another reason. The 6th week was when the situation became something I could no longer ignore. One evening, I went out for a bike ride. I needed fresh air and time away from the apartment. While I was riding, I received a message from Shane. "Why didn't you mention you were living with Lucy?" he asked. The question seemed strange. I replied with something like, "Should I have?" His next message was short. "You need to ask her to leave." I immediately felt uneasy. "Why?" I asked. The message showed that he had read my question. He did not respond. I waited for another message, but none came. For the rest of the ride, I kept thinking about his warning. He knew Lucy had dated his brother. He had agreed she was strange. Now he was telling me to remove her from my home, but he would not explain why. I returned to my apartment later that evening. Lucy did not hear me enter. I moved quietly through the living room and realized she was in my bedroom. That alone made me angry. She had no reason to be in there without permission. Then I saw her. Lucy was walking around my bedroom completely naked and singing to herself. I froze. Before I could say anything, I saw my cat nearby. Lucy lifted her leg and kicked through the air in the cat's direction. The cat moved away in fear. I do not know whether Lucy's foot made contact at that moment, but her actions made everything clear. My cat was terrified of her because Lucy had been hurting or threatening her when I was not watching. I felt sick. I had allowed this woman into my home, and while I was at work, she had access to my pet. The cat could not tell me what was happening. Her fear had been the only warning. I did not confront Lucy immediately. Part of me wanted to throw her belongings outside that same night, but another part was afraid of how she might react. I went to bed knowing I would ask her to leave in the morning. I barely slept. When I checked my phone the next morning, Shane had finally replied. The message said something close to, "She stabbed my brother with a fork, and that only scratches the surface." He included the phone number of Lucy's former boyfriend and told me to call him. I stared at the message for a long time. Lucy was only a room away. Her belongings filled my apartment. she had a key, and someone who knew her history was warning me that she had attacked a man with a fork. I called the number. Her ex-boyfriend answered, and we spoke for around half an hour. He did not seem surprised that Lucy had moved into my apartment after a fight with someone. He warned me that she could be extremely unstable and dangerous. He told me parts of her childhood history. According to him, Lucy had grown up in foster care and had been moved between several homes before eventually reuniting with her birth mother. Lucy had once told him she secretly read a report written by one of her former foster carers. The report allegedly described Lucy as the devil's child. I did not know whether those exact words were true, but hearing them after weeks of her speaking in tongues made my skin crawl. He told me other stories. He claimed that Lucy had once punched a baby and laughed. He also confirmed that she had stabbed him with a fork. There were more details, but some were confusing, and others were so disturbing that I struggled to believe them. I did not know which parts were completely accurate. Ex-partners can sometimes exaggerate or speak out of anger, but Shane had warned me too, and I had already seen enough of Lucy's behavior to know I could not take the risk. After ending the call, I found Lucy and told her she needed to move out. I did not tell her the truth. I did not say I had been speaking to her ex-boyfriend. I did not accuse her of hurting my cat or mention the fork. I was afraid that confronting her directly would make her angry. Instead, I invented a story. I told her my mother needed somewhere to stay for a while, so I needed the apartment back. To my surprise, Lucy took the news calmly. She did not shout or argue. She said she understood and agreed to call around. She told me she would arrange for someone to collect her belongings as soon as possible. I felt relieved. For the first time in weeks, I believed the problem might end peacefully. That night, I went to bed. I do not know how long I had been asleep when I woke up. There was movement in the apartment. I listened and heard Lucy walking back and forth. She was pacing quickly through the rooms and whispering to herself. Her steps were frantic. She moved from one side of the apartment to the other, then turned and came back. I sat up and listened. The whispering continued. I could not understand the words. Eventually, I got out of bed. I found her still pacing. "What are you doing?" I asked. Lucy stopped and looked at me. Then she said, "The devil is telling me I need to slit your throat with a knife while you sleep." I do not know how I remained calm. Inside, I felt as though all the blood had left my body. She had just told me that a voice was ordering her to murder me. She was inside my apartment. The kitchen contained knives. She had access to my bedroom. I understood that any sign of panic could make the situation worse, so I nodded calmly, almost as if she had told me something ordinary. "Okay," I said. Then I added, "I'm just going downstairs for a smoke." I did not run. I did not grab my belongings. I walked toward the door and left the apartment as naturally as I could. Once I was outside and far enough away, I called the police. I explained what Lucy had said and told them I was afraid to return. The police arrived and entered the apartment. I did not go with them. I hid around the corner, smoking cigarette after cigarette while I waited. I kept imagining Lucy looking through the windows or coming outside with a knife. Every sound made me turn around. Eventually, the police called me. They had removed her from the apartment. At Lucy's request, they were taking her to her mother's home. I waited until I knew she was gone before returning. The apartment was filled with her belongings, but the immediate danger had passed. I never spoke to Lucy again. For a long time, she remained on my Facebook. I could see her posting dozens of selfies every day, as if nothing had happened. It was strange to look at those pictures. To anyone else, she probably looked like a normal young woman smiling at a camera. I saw the person who had paced through my apartment and told me the devil wanted her to cut my throat. The experience did not end when she left. While Lucy had been staying with me, strange things had happened in the apartment. I had tried not to connect them to her, but after the police removed her, I became more aware of them. My cat developed a strange interest in the bathroom mirror. She would sit and stare at it for long periods, watching the reflection as though something was moving inside it. Sometimes she seemed focused on a point behind me, but when I turned, nothing was there. The apartment also began to feel watched. I am not a religious person, and I do not normally believe in paranormal things. I prefer normal explanations. But the feeling in the apartment became difficult to ignore. Sometimes I would be sitting alone and suddenly feel certain that someone was standing behind me. I would turn around quickly, but the room would be empty. Other times, I thought I heard movement from my bedroom while I was in the living room. I began checking rooms before relaxing. One day, the feeling became so strong that I was convinced someone was hiding in my bedroom. There was no sound and no clear evidence. I simply knew someone was there. The fear became unbearable. I left the apartment. I remember thinking, nope, 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 as I walked out. I stayed away until I felt able to return. There was nobody in the bedroom. Nothing had moved. The doors and windows were secure. Still, the fear had felt completely real. My sleep paralysis also became much worse. I had experienced it before, but after Lucy's stay, the episodes became nightmarish. I would wake up unable to move and feel a presence inside the room. Sometimes I thought something was standing near the bed. Other times, I felt watched from the doorway. Even after I could move again, I was too frightened to sleep. Some nights, I remained awake until morning. The lack of rest became so bad that I occasionally had to call in sick to work the next day. I knew sleep paralysis could create frightening images and sensations. I understood that the mind can remain partly asleep while the body wakes up. That was the logical explanation. But the timing disturbed me. The apartment had never felt so oppressive before Lucy moved in. After she left, the atmosphere seemed changed. I began wondering whether she had left something behind. I did not mean clothing or another bag. I wondered whether something invisible had remained in the apartment. Lucy had spoken constantly about religion, devils, and spiritual forces. She spoke in tongues. She screamed in her sleep. Then she told me the devil wanted her to murder me. Even though I did not believe in those things, living with her made them feel harder to dismiss. Later, I began dating a man I met on Tinder. He did not know every detail of the story at first. When he spent time at my apartment, he often seemed uncomfortable. He could not always explain why. He simply said the place made him feel uneasy. Whenever we had the choice, he preferred staying at his home. His reaction bothered me because it meant I was not the only person who felt something was wrong. Maybe the apartment carried tension because of what had happened there. Maybe my fear affected him. Maybe Lucy's behavior had made me notice normal sounds and shadows more than before. Those are all possible explanations. But part of me still wonders whether she brought something into my home. The entire experience taught me how quickly kindness can become dangerous. I had received a call from an old acquaintance who sounded upset. I offered her my couch because I wanted to help. Within an hour, she had moved her entire life into my apartment. Within a few weeks, she was controlling my movements, taking my money, frightening my cat, and treating my home as her own. Then I learned about the violence in her past. And finally, she told me she was thinking about cutting my throat while I slept. There were warning signs from the beginning. The huge amount of luggage, her comment about having the apartment to herself for 6 months, the speaking in tongues, the open-eyed sleeping and screaming, the obsessive phone calls, the stolen money, the way my cat reacted to her. I ignored each warning because there were also good moments. We had fun on our nights out. I liked having a friend. I felt sorry for her. Every time I considered asking her to leave, I convinced myself I was being unfair. I wanted to be kind, and I did not want to judge someone who was struggling. That kindness nearly placed me in serious danger. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I had not woken up that night. Would Lucy have acted on what she said? Was she only trying to frighten me? Was she experiencing some kind of crisis and warning me because she did not want to hurt me? I will never know. I only know that she was pacing through my apartment in the middle of the night, whispering to herself, and then told me a voice wanted her to take a knife and slit my throat. That was enough. I do not regret calling the police. I regret allowing the situation to continue as long as it did. I also regret not trusting my cat sooner. Animals cannot explain what is happening, but they often show fear for a reason. My cat had been trying to avoid Lucy for weeks. I assumed she was reacting to noise or unfamiliar behavior. Then I saw Lucy kicking toward her when she thought I was not home. After that, I understood. There were other details and smaller incidents during those weeks, but these are the parts I remember most clearly. The story sounds exaggerated when I tell it all at once. An acquaintance suddenly moves into my apartment. She speaks in tongues, sleeps with her eyes open, screams at night, controls my movements, steals money, abuses my cat, and has a violent history. Then, she says the devil wants her to murder me. But I do not need to exaggerate anything. That is why I have often considered turning the experience into a book. I am a writer, and the story already has everything a thriller would need. The unexpected phone call, the guest who slowly takes over, the warnings from people who knew her before, the hidden violence, the animal that understands the danger first, the threat in the middle of the night, the escape, and the police, even the strange feelings that remained after she was gone. The difference is that in a book, readers might complain that the character ignored too many warning signs. They might say no sensible person would allow someone like Lucy to stay for 6 weeks. But real situations do not always look dangerous at the beginning. The person causing trouble does not behave badly every second. Lucy could be entertaining, friendly, and fun. That was what kept me confused. The frightening moments were mixed with ordinary ones. That is how I allowed things to continue. I no longer speak to her, and I do not know what her life is like now. For a long time, the only sign that she still existed was the endless stream of selfies appearing online. She smiled in every photograph. Anyone looking at her profile would probably have thought she was confident, social, and happy. They would not have seen the woman pacing through my dark apartment. They would not have heard her whispering. They would not have heard her calmly tell me that the devil wanted my throat cut while I slept. I saw that side of her, and when I think back to the night she called me on the tram, I often wish I had allowed the phone to ring. Before the next witness tells their story, take a moment to subscribe to Nachtmeier Witness. This channel is for the late hours, when sleep is close, but the mind is still awake enough to notice every sound in the room. New true stories arrive here for anyone drawn to strange encounters, uneasy memories, and nights that never felt normal again. Leave a like if the stories have pulled you in so far. Now, let's return to the darkness. During the last 4 years of high school, I suffered from extreme nightmares. When I say extreme, I do not mean ordinary bad dreams where someone is chasing you through a dark street, or where you fall from a high place and wake up before hitting the ground. I had dreams filled with blood, violence, and death. I watched terrible things happen to people I loved. Sometimes I saw family members die. Sometimes it was my friends. Other times, the people in the dreams had faces I did not recognize, but I could still feel their fear and pain as if I knew them. The nightmares were different, almost every night, but they always felt real. They were vivid enough that I could see small details. I remembered the expressions on people's faces. I remembered the places where the dreams happened. I remembered sounds, smells, and even the feeling of the air around me. Most dreams disappear quickly after waking up. You may remember one strange image or a small part of the story, but the rest fades before breakfast. Mine did not fade. Many of those nightmares are still inside my head today. I can remember scenes from dreams I had years ago more clearly than I remember some real days from that time. I wish I could forget them, but they remained with me as if they were memories of things that had actually happened. At first, I tried to ignore them. Everyone has nightmares sometimes. I told myself it was probably caused by stress from school, growing up, or worrying too much. High school can be difficult. There are exams, assignments, friendships, family problems, and constant pressure about the future. I thought the nightmares would eventually stop by themselves. They did not. They happened almost every night. I would go to bed already knowing what was waiting for me. Sometimes I managed to fall asleep quickly, but that did not help. The moment I entered a deep sleep, the nightmares began. I would wake up sweating, shaking, and breathing heavily. My heart would be pounding as if I had been running. For the first few seconds, I would not know where I was. The darkness of my room would mix with whatever I had just seen. A pile of clothes might look like a body. A shadow near the door might look like someone standing there. I would reach for a light or my phone and remind myself that I was awake. Nobody had died. There was no blood. I was safe in my bedroom. Even after understanding that, the fear did not immediately disappear. The dream had felt too real. I could still see everything when I closed my eyes. Sometimes I tried to go back to sleep. Other times, I stayed awake for the rest of the night. As the nightmares continued, bedtime became the worst part of my day. During the morning and afternoon, I could distract myself with school, conversations, music, or my phone. At night, those distractions ended. The house became quiet, everyone went to sleep, and I was left alone with the knowledge that another nightmare might be waiting. I began delaying sleep. I stayed up watching videos, scrolling through social media, or doing things that were not even interesting. I was not staying awake because I wanted to. I was doing it because I was afraid of what would happen when I closed my eyes. I would tell myself that I was only going to stay awake for another 10 minutes. 10 minutes became an hour. Then 2 hours. Sometimes I watched the time move closer and closer to morning. I knew I needed sleep, but sleep no longer felt safe. The more tired I became, the harder it was to think clearly. Still, every time I felt myself beginning to drift off, I remembered the nightmares and forced my eyes open again. Eventually, the fear became so strong that I could barely fall asleep on my own. I became dependent on one of my friends. My friend would FaceTime me at night and stay on the call while I tried to sleep. We would talk about school, random things from the day, funny stories, or anything that could keep my mind away from the nightmares. Sometimes the conversation lasted for hours. My friend's voice became the only thing that made me feel safe enough to close my eyes. I would place my phone near the bed, listen to them speaking, and slowly begin to relax. Knowing that someone was there made the room feel less empty. If I woke up frightened, I could look at the screen or hear the sound of the call and remind myself that I was not alone. Often, I fell asleep while my friend was still talking. It became the only reliable way I could sleep. I felt guilty about depending on them so much. They needed rest too. They had their own schoolwork, problems, and responsibilities. They should not have had to stay awake every night. because I was terrified of dreaming. But I did not know what else to do. On nights when my friend was busy or unable to call, the fear returned immediately. I would sit in bed with the lights on, exhausted but unable to lie down. I tried many different things to make the nightmares stop. I searched for relaxation methods. I tried breathing slowly before bed. I listened to calm music and peaceful sounds. I avoided frightening films and stories. I tried thinking about happy memories before closing my eyes. None of it helped. The nightmares did not care what I had watched or thought about during the day. They still came. I tried pills that were supposed to reduce anxiety and help me relax. I hoped that if my body became calmer, my mind might also calm down. The pills did not solve the problem. Maybe they made me feel a little more tired, but being tired was never the real problem. I was already exhausted. The problem was that sleep took me into a place I was afraid to enter. Sometimes the pills made it harder to wake up from the nightmares, which made the experience feel even worse. I even spoke with an online group that was interested in supernatural subjects. By that point, I was desperate enough to consider almost any explanation. The nightmares were so violent, detailed, and constant that I began wondering whether something unusual was happening to me. I wondered if they were warnings, messages, or signs that something was wrong beyond normal stress. Some people in the group offered different ideas. They talked about negative energy, spirits, protection methods, and ways of controlling dreams. I tried some of their suggestions because I wanted to believe there was a solution. Nothing changed. No matter what I did before bed, the same fear returned when I slept. The nightmares continued for years. I became so exhausted that I could barely function. At school, I struggled to pay attention. Teachers would speak, but their words seemed to pass through my head without staying there. I read the same page several times and still could not remember what it said. Simple tasks became difficult. I forgot things. I became irritated easily. Sometimes people spoke to me, and it took me several seconds to understand that they expected an answer. My body felt heavy all the time. My eyes hurt, my head felt foggy, and I never felt fully awake. Even when I managed to sleep for a few hours, it was not restful. My mind spent the night trapped in violent dreams, and I woke up feeling as though I had been fighting or running for hours. Sleep was supposed to help my body recover. For me, it became another source of exhaustion. As the lack of sleep became worse, I started seeing and hearing strange things. At the time, I did not know what they were. I might notice movement in the corner of my vision, but when I turned, nothing was there. Sometimes shadows seemed to move across a wall. I heard small sounds that I could not explain, like whispers, tapping, or someone moving nearby. I became afraid that the nightmares were somehow following me into the daytime. Now, when I think about those experiences, I believe some of them may have been hallucinations caused by exhaustion. I had been sleeping so little that my brain was probably no longer working normally. When someone stays awake for too long, the mind can begin to confuse dreams, thoughts, shadows, and reality. At the time, however, those things felt real. I already felt unsafe while sleeping, and now I did not feel completely safe while awake either. Sometimes I thought I saw a person standing at the end of a hallway. When I looked again, there was only a coat, a shadow, or an open door. Once or twice, I thought I heard someone say my name when nobody was there. Small things frightened me because I no longer trusted my own senses. I did not know which experiences were real. The nightmares had made me question sleep, and exhaustion made me question the waking world. I began feeling trapped. If I slept, I would have nightmares. If I stayed awake, I would become so exhausted that I saw things. There seemed to be no safe choice. People around me did not fully understand how serious it had become. It is difficult to explain constant nightmares to someone who has never experienced them. When you say you are afraid to sleep, some people laugh or tell you it is only a dream. They remind you that dreams cannot hurt you. They are correct in a physical sense, but they do not understand how real the fear feels. A nightmare may not leave cuts or bruises, but the body still reacts as though the danger is real. Your heart races, your muscles become tense, you wake up confused and afraid. Then the images remain in your mind all day. When it happens every night for years, it changes the way you live. I began planning everything around sleep. I worried about whether my friend would be available to call. I worried about how many hours I could stay awake before school. I worried that I might fall asleep during class and have a nightmare in front of everyone. I worried that people would think I was lazy when I could barely stay awake. I wanted to sleep normally more than anything. I wanted to close my eyes without fear. I wanted to wake up and not remember seeing someone I loved die. I wanted my mind to become quiet. Then, around 3 years ago, the nightmares suddenly stopped. There was no clear reason. I had not found a new treatment. I had not changed my life in some major way. I had not discovered a perfect relaxation method. They simply ended. At first, I did not trust it. I had one night without a nightmare, then another. I expected them to return at any moment. A week passed. Then, more time. The nightmares did not come back. But something else changed too. I stopped dreaming completely. At least, that was how it felt. I would close my eyes at night, and then it would suddenly be morning. There were no images, stories, or memories between those two moments. It was like someone switched me off and then turned me back on several hours later. For many people, that would probably feel peaceful. For me, it was strange, but I was also relieved. The blank sleep was much better than the nightmares. I did not wake up shaking. I did not see people dying. I did not have to FaceTime someone every night just to feel safe enough to sleep. I could finally go to bed without expecting violence inside my own mind. Still, my relationship with sleep never became completely normal. Even after the nightmares stopped, my body seemed unable to handle long periods of sleep. To this day, if I sleep for more than about 5 hours, I feel terrible when I wake up. Instead of feeling rested, I feel sick, heavy, and confused. My head hurts, my body feels weak, and it can take a long time before I feel normal. It is as though my body became used to surviving on very little sleep and no longer understands what to do with more. People often tell me that 5 hours is not enough. I know that. I know the body usually needs more rest. But when I sleep longer, I feel worse. For a long time, I accepted the dreamless sleep as my new normal. I did not love it, but I was grateful. I would rather see nothing than return to the nightmares. Then, a little more than a year ago, I started dreaming again. The first dreams were not constant. I might have one dream every few months. Sometimes I barely remembered it. Other times, I woke up with a few images still in my mind. At first, the return of dreams did not frighten me too much. Not every dream was bad. Some were strange but harmless. Some involved places I knew, people from school, or situations that made no sense. I thought maybe my mind was finally becoming normal again. I tried to see it as a good sign. The dreams remained rare, so I did not think about them every night. Then, more recently, the nightmares started returning. They are not happening every night yet. They have not reached the level they did during high school, but I recognize the feeling. I wake up with my heart racing. The images stay in my mind. I begin thinking about the nightmare before the next bedtime. That is what scares me most. I am not only afraid of one bad dream, I am afraid it is the beginning of another long streak. I know what happened the last time. I remember the years of exhaustion. I remember being unable to sleep without someone on FaceTime. I remember the violent scenes, the people I loved dying, and the strange things I saw when I had been awake too long. I remember how badly it affected school, my thoughts, and my ability to function. I do not know if I can handle going through that again. When evening comes, part of me begins watching the clock. I feel the old fear returning slowly. I start wondering what I will see when I fall asleep. I try telling myself that a few nightmares do not mean the whole pattern will return. I tell myself that I am older now and might be able to handle it differently. But fear does not always listen to reason. The old memories are still strong. Sometimes I lie in bed and remember the years when sleep was the enemy. I remember needing another person's voice in the room. I remember forcing my eyes open even when my body felt close to breaking. I remember waking from nightmares and feeling as though something terrible had actually happened. I do not want to return to that life. I do not want to become dependent on someone else just to fall asleep. I do not want to spend the day exhausted and the night frightened. I do not want to question whether the shadows I see are real or caused by lack of sleep. Most of all, I do not want to be afraid of closing my eyes. Sleep is supposed to be safe. It is supposed to be the time when the body rests and the mind becomes quiet. For me, it became the place where the worst things I could imagine happened again and again. Even during the years when I did not dream, I never completely forgot that fear. It stayed hidden in the background, waiting. Now that the nightmares have started returning, the fear has returned with them. Each new nightmare feels like a warning. Maybe it will be only one. Maybe I will sleep normally the next night. Or maybe this is how it begins again. One nightmare becomes two. Two become a week. Then I am afraid to sleep. Then I stop sleeping. Then exhaustion begins changing what I see while awake. I do not know whether that will happen. I hope it will not. But the possibility is enough to frighten me. There is a special kind of helplessness in being afraid of your own mind. You can lock your doors against a stranger. You can leave a dangerous place. You can turn off a frightening film. But you cannot easily escape the things your brain creates while you sleep. They are already inside you. You carry them into bed every night. I wish I knew why the nightmares started during high school. I wish I knew why they stopped. I wish I knew why my dreams disappeared completely for several years and why they have now started coming back. Maybe there is a clear reason that I have not found yet. Maybe the nightmares are connected to stress, anxiety, exhaustion, or something else happening in my life. I do not believe they are supernatural anymore, though during the worst years I became desperate enough to consider it. I think my mind was struggling, and I did not know how to help it. Still, understanding that does not make the nightmares less frightening when they happen. Inside the dream, I do not know it is a dream. I believe the people I love are really dying. I believe the blood is real. I believe I am trapped in whatever terrible place my mind has created. Then I wake up and have to convince myself that none of it happened. Sometimes that takes only a few seconds. Sometimes the feeling remains for the entire day. I am trying not to let the fear take control again. I do not want one nightmare to convince me that every night will be the same. I do not want to begin avoiding sleep before the pattern has even returned. But it is difficult when I remember what happened before. Those 4 years changed me. They taught me that a person can become afraid of something the body needs to survive. They taught me how quickly exhaustion can affect memory, emotions, and even the things you see. They taught me that dreams can leave wounds even when nothing physically touches you. I am older now, but I still carry the memories of those nights. I remember the nightmares. I remember the fear. I remember the sound of my friend's voice helping me fall asleep. I remember waking after only a few hours and feeling relieved that the night was finally over. For 3 years, I had silence inside my sleep. I closed my eyes and woke up the next day without seeing anything. I thought maybe the worst part of my life was finally behind me. Now the dreams are returning. Some are only dreams. Some are nightmares. And every time I wake from one, I wonder if this is the beginning of everything again. I do not know whether I could survive another long period like the first one. I do not know if I can spend more years fighting sleep. I only know that I do not want to be afraid of the night anymore. My dad and I were in London for a long weekend when this happened. We had planned the trip as a short break, just a few days of sightseeing, walking around the city and spending some time together. London was busy as always, but that weekend felt even more crowded because the London Marathon was taking place. Earlier that day, we had watched part of the marathon. The streets were full of people cheering, holding signs, taking photographs, and trying to get a good view of the runners. There was a lot of noise and excitement everywhere. After watching for a while, my dad and I decided to head toward Camden. We made our way to a tube station and joined the crowd waiting on the platform. Everything felt completely normal. People were checking their phones, talking quietly, looking down the tracks, or studying the signs to make sure they were waiting for the correct train. I do not remember thinking about danger at all. Tube stations can feel a little uncomfortable because of how close the platform is to the tracks, but most people become used to it. There is usually a yellow line near the edge, and everyone understands that they should stand behind it. You hear trains arriving and leaving all day, so after a while, the sound becomes part of the background. My dad and I were standing there, waiting to continue our journey, when we suddenly heard a woman scream. It was not the kind of scream someone makes after being surprised or frightened by something small. It was sharp, desperate, and full of panic. Everyone around us turned toward the sound. A man had fallen onto the tracks. From what we could understand, he had passed out while standing on the platform. He had dropped without warning and landed below, directly where the trains traveled. For a moment, nobody seemed to know what to do. The woman who had screamed began shouting, "Somebody press something." She kept looking around the walls, clearly hoping there would be an emergency button nearby. I think she imagined there might be a large alarm or a switch that would immediately stop any approaching train. There was no such button that we could see. People looked around wildly, searching for something that did not appear to exist. There was no obvious emergency stop control on the wall. There was nothing a passenger could press to cut the power or tell a train driver that someone was on the tracks. Then we heard the train. It started as a distant sound traveling through the tunnel. Anyone who has used the London Underground knows that sound. Before a train appears, you often hear the low rumble of it approaching. The rails begin to make noise, the air changes, and the sound grows louder as the train moves closer to the station. Usually that noise means your train has arrived. This time, it meant a man had only seconds left. Several people rushed toward the edge of the platform and tried to reach him. The man was unconscious, or barely conscious, so he could not climb back up by himself. People leaned down, reaching for his arms and clothes, trying to get a strong enough grip to lift him. My dad immediately ran over to help. I stayed where I was for a moment because my mind could not process what was happening. 1 second, we had been waiting for a normal train to Camden. The next, my dad was near the edge of the platform, trying to pull an unconscious man away from the path of an approaching train. The rumbling grew louder. I could hear people shouting instructions, but everyone was speaking at once. Some were telling the people near the edge to pull harder. Others were warning them not to fall. Someone may have been shouting for station staff, but there did not seem to be anyone close enough to help immediately. I entered a full state of panic. I wanted to do something, but I had no idea what I could do. There were already several people around the man. If I joined them without knowing how to help, I might only get in the way. Worse, I might knock someone off balance and cause another person to fall onto the tracks. I began looking around frantically. I searched the walls for an alarm. I looked for a member of staff. I looked toward the stairs, wondering if someone should run for help. At the same time, I felt frozen. My body was moving, but I was not going anywhere. I was pacing in a small space, taking a step in one direction and then changing my mind. I could not focus on one action. It was one of the strangest feelings I have ever experienced. I was desperate to help, yet I felt completely useless. As I looked around, I noticed a tourist couple standing nearby. The man was holding a camera. Instead of helping or moving away, he was taking photographs of the scene. He photographed the people panicking. He photographed the people leaning over the platform. He photographed everyone running around and shouting while a train was approaching an unconscious man. His partner stood beside him, looking confused and bewildered. She did not seem to know what to do either, but at least she was not treating the moment like something interesting to collect as a holiday memory. Seeing the man taking photographs made me feel angry, but I was too frightened to say anything. I could not understand how he could stand there calmly, using his camera, while everyone else believed they were about to watch someone die. Maybe taking pictures was his reaction to shock. Maybe he did not fully understand what was happening. But in that moment, it seemed horrible. I think I was crying by then. My heart was beating faster than it ever had before. I could feel it pounding in my chest, and I was struggling to breathe normally. The sound of the train continued getting louder, and every second seemed to disappear too quickly. The people trying to lift the man were not succeeding. He had fallen awkwardly and appeared to have hit the ground hard. His body was heavy and unresponsive. The people on the platform could reach him, but they could not get a good enough grip to pull him up. At several points, it looked as if some of the people helping him might fall onto the tracks as well. They were leaning so far over the edge that others had to hold on to them. One person would reach down while another grabbed the back of their coat or held their waist. The entire group looked unstable. I was terrified that the rescue attempt would turn one victim into several. My dad was among them, and I could see how close he was to the edge. Part of me wanted to shout at him to move back. I did not want him to fall. At the same time, I knew the man below had no chance if everyone stopped trying. The train was coming around a curve before entering the station. At first, we could not see it. We could only hear it. That made the fear worse, because we did not know exactly how far away it was. The sound bounced through the tunnel, making it difficult to judge how much time remained. Then, we began to see the lights. 2 bright lights appeared around the curve. The train was coming directly toward us. People began screaming louder. The man was still on the tracks. The passengers trying to lift him still could not get him onto the platform. I remember thinking that we were all about to see something terrible. There was nowhere for the man to go. He was lying in the path of the train, and he did not appear capable of moving himself. The platform was crowded, and there was no barrier between him and the approaching train. At the far end of the station, away from where the man had fallen, several people started jumping up and down. They waved their arms above their heads and shouted toward the driver. At first, I did not understand what they were doing. Then I realized they were trying to make themselves visible. The train driver might not be able to see the man on the tracks because of the curve. However, the driver might see a group of people waving and behaving strangely on the platform. It was our only chance. More people joined them. They jumped, waved, screamed, and pointed toward the tracks. The train continued moving forward. Its lights became brighter. The sound filled the station. The people trying to lift the man made another desperate attempt, but he still did not come up. I wanted to close my eyes, but I could not. Everything seemed to slow down even though it was happening quickly. I could see my dad near the platform edge. I could see the unconscious man below. I could see the train turning into the station. I could see the people at the far end waving their arms. I could also see the tourist still holding his camera. Then we heard the screeching. It was a violent metal-on-metal sound that cut through every other noise in the station. The driver had seen the people waving. The brakes had been applied. The train was still moving, but it was slowing down. Nobody knew if it would stop in time. The screeching became louder as the wheels fought against the rails. The train continued sliding toward the man. I think everyone stopped breathing. There was nothing more we could do. The train moved closer. Then it stopped. The front of the train was only about 3 feet away from the man's head. 3 feet. If the driver had noticed the warning only a moment later, the train would have reached him. It could have decapitated him. For a few seconds after the train stopped, the station remained strangely quiet. The screaming had ended, and everyone seemed frozen by the fact that the man was still alive. Then people began moving again. The driver opened the door to his compartment and got out. He was furious. He slammed the door behind him so hard that the sound echoed across the platform. He looked terrified as well as angry, and I could not blame him. He had come within seconds of killing someone. It would not have been his fault. He was driving the train normally and had no reason to expect a person to be lying on the tracks around the curve. Still, knowing it was an accident would not have removed the trauma. Train drivers have almost no control when someone suddenly appears in front of them. A train cannot stop as quickly as a car, especially when it is already entering a station. The driver had reacted as soon as he understood something was wrong. He had done everything he could, and it had worked. But he had still come terrifyingly close to seeing a man disappear beneath the front of his train. Once the train was fully stopped, the people on the platform were finally able to get the man out. With no immediate danger of the train moving toward them, they could take more time and find better positions. Several bystanders reached down while others helped support them. They managed to lift him back onto the platform. The man appeared to move in and out of consciousness. He had landed face first on the tracks when he fainted. Blood was streaming down his face from a cut on his forehead. He looked confused and weak, and I am not sure he understood how close he had come to dying. People moved him farther away from the edge. Someone stayed close to him while others tried to contact medical help. The panic slowly changed into a different kind of tension. The immediate danger was over, but nobody knew how badly he had been injured or why he had collapsed. Eventually, medics arrived. They checked him, treated the bleeding, and prepared to take him away. From what we understood, he would need stitches for the cut on his forehead. He also needed to be examined to find out why he had passed out. Considering what could have happened, a cut requiring stitches seemed almost unbelievably minor. A few seconds had separated him from death. A few feet had separated his head from the train. The people who waved at the driver may have saved his life. My dad and I remained at the station while everything was being handled. Neither of us knew what to say. My dad had been directly involved in trying to lift the man. He had stood near the edge while the train approached, and I could see that the experience had shaken him. I had been standing farther back, but I felt completely exhausted. My body had been full of fear and adrenaline. Now that the danger had passed, I felt weak and unsteady. Eventually, we decided to continue our journey to Camden. The first train could not continue immediately because of what had happened, so we waited for the next one. When it arrived, my dad and I got on. The woman who had first screamed and shouted for someone to press an alarm was on the same train. She ended up sitting or standing right next to us. The three of us looked terrible. We looked as though we had just returned from a war. Our faces were pale, our eyes were wide. Nobody seemed fully present. Someone had a bottle of water, and we passed it between us. We took small drinks, trying to calm our breathing and recover from what we had just seen. We barely spoke. There was nothing useful to say. The woman had been the first person to raise the alarm. My dad had helped try to lift the man. I had watched the whole thing while feeling completely helpless. We were strangers, but for those few minutes, we had shared the same terror. Other passengers on the train went about their normal journeys. Some talked, read, or looked at their phones. They had no idea what had happened at the previous station. That felt strange to me. Only minutes earlier, we had believed a man was about to be killed. Now we were sitting on another train as if it were a normal day. London continued around us. The trains kept running, people kept traveling. The city did not stop because one person had nearly died. My dad and I eventually calmed down enough to continue the day, but the experience remained in my mind. I kept seeing the lights of the train coming around the curve. I kept hearing the sound of the brakes. I kept imagining what would have happened if the driver had not looked toward the people waving at the far end of the platform. The timing had been unbelievably close. The night before, my father and I had been at a different tube station. That station had recently installed a protective wall along the edge of the platform. It was made from glass or plexiglass and separated passengers from the tracks. The wall had sliding doors that lined up with the doors of the train. The platform doors remained closed until a train had arrived and fully stopped. Only then would they open. I remember looking at the barrier and commenting to my dad that it was a clever idea. I said it must prevent many accidents and save train drivers from a lot of trauma. At the time, it was only a passing observation. I thought about people dropping objects onto the tracks or accidentally stepping too close to the edge. I understood that the barrier could stop someone from falling, but I had never personally seen how quickly such an accident could happen. The next day, we watched a man pass out and fall onto an unprotected track. The difference between the two stations became impossible to ignore. At the station with the barrier, he would have collapsed against the wall or onto the platform. He might still have injured himself, but he would not have landed in front of a moving train. The driver would never have come within seconds of killing him. The passengers would not have risked falling onto the tracks while trying to rescue him. Everyone involved would have been spared that moment of absolute terror. I thought about my comment from the previous night many times afterward. It seemed like a strange warning that I had not understood. One day, I was casually telling my father how useful platform barriers must be. The next day, we saw exactly why they were needed. The incident also changed how I react at train stations. I now pay much more attention to where I stand. I do not remain close to the edge unless the train has stopped. If someone near me appears unsteady, I notice it. Before that day, I assumed accidents on train tracks usually happened because someone was behaving recklessly, ignoring warnings, or deliberately entering the track area. This man did nothing wrong. He simply passed out. One moment, he was standing on the platform. The next, he was lying unconscious in front of an approaching train. He could not protect himself. His survival depended entirely on strangers. Some tried to lift him. Some held on to the rescuers so they would not fall. Some searched for an alarm. Others waved and shouted until the driver saw them. Even the driver, who had only seconds to react, did everything possible to stop the train. The situation was chaotic, and nobody had a perfect plan, but together they saved him. I still feel ashamed sometimes when I remember how frozen I became. I wanted to help, but I could not make myself choose an action. I paced, looked around, cried, and panicked. Later, I understood that people react differently during emergencies. Some run toward the danger, like my father did. Some immediately shout for help, like the woman did. Some look for a way to warn others. Some freeze. That day, I froze. I hope I would react differently now, but I cannot be certain. Fear does strange things to the body. I was moving, yet I felt trapped in place. My mind was racing, but I could not form a useful plan. The tourist with the camera also remains in my memory. Maybe he later showed the photographs to people as part of his trip to London. Maybe he thought he was documenting an important event. Maybe taking pictures helped him deal with shock. I do not know. To me, his calmness felt almost as unreal as the accident itself. While everyone else screamed and tried to save a life, he stood there taking photographs. His partner looked as shocked and confused as the rest of us. I sometimes wonder what those photographs looked like. They probably showed my dad and the others leaning over the platform. They may have shown the train lights appearing around the curve. They may even have shown me pacing and crying in the background. I would never want to see them. The images are already clear enough in my mind. I remember the man lying below the platform. I remember his blood after he was pulled up. I remember the train stopping only 3 feet away. I remember the driver slamming his door and looking both angry and terrified. I remember passing water between my dad, the woman, and me on the next train. Most of all, I remember how ordinary the day had been before the scream. We had watched the London Marathon. We were heading to Camden. We were simply waiting for a train. Then one man lost consciousness, and an entire platform was thrown into panic. It lasted only a few minutes, but those minutes felt endless. The man survived because the people at the far end of the station thought to wave at the driver, and because the driver noticed them in time. Had either of those things happened a second later, the ending would have been completely different. Instead of continuing to Camden, my dad and I might have witnessed someone being killed directly in front of us. The driver might have carried that memory for the rest of his life. The people trying to lift the man might have been hit as well. I still think about the barrier we had seen the night before. At the time, it seemed like a useful safety feature. After the accident, it felt like something every underground platform should have. A simple wall and a set of doors could have prevented all of it. Whenever I see platform barriers now, I remember what I said to my dad. It must prevent a lot of accidents and save the drivers a lot of trauma. Less than a day later, we watched a driver come within 3 feet of living through exactly that trauma. The stories may be over, but some nights do not end when the video does. The people you heard tonight were not looking for fear. They were living normal lives until one moment changed the way they saw the world around them. Tell me in the comments which story stayed with you the longest. Subscribe to Nockmeyer Witness for more true accounts from people who saw something they wish they could forget. Good night, and if you wake up suddenly, do not assume it was just a dream.